host, Katherine Grant. I'm on summer vacation, but I didn't want to leave you hanging, so I decided to round up all of the historical romance story samples we've heard so far. In this episode, you're getting part one of the Regency Romance Roundup because we've had so many delightful Regencies already sampled this year. In this episode, you will hear from Erica Ridley, Courtney McCaskill, Charlie Lane, Matilda Madison, Mira Platt, and a little something from yours truly. Don't forget to subscribe to the Historical Romance Sampler wherever you catch this podcast, so you get our fresh episodes every week. I will be back with a new standard episode on August 7th with best-selling author Elizabeth Everett. Enjoy these stories. Hot Earl Summer by Erica Ridley. So today you're reading an excerpt from Hot Earl Summer, which is the next book in the Wild Winchesters. So for any readers who haven't yet caught up on the series, can you give a quick pitch on what they're missing out on?
Sure. So this is a very fun series, if I do say so myself, because we've got this wild family of caper-committing siblings. What that means is if you've ever seen the TV show Leverage or heard of superheroes, they've got kind of a Robin Hood vibe. So they're out fighting for justice, whatever it takes. And there's heists in every book, lots of banter and shenanigans. And it has been a blast to write. And I hope you have a lot of fun reading them as well.
It is a really fun series. And it is, like you said, like they're after justice and it's kind of found family vibe. So it's a lot of fun. Go read it. But first, hear this excerpt from Hot Earl Summer, which is coming out in 2024. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the blurb. No one's ever heard this yet before because this is an excerpt of a book that hasn't been released. Bold, curvy Elizabeth Winchester loves cuddling hedgehogs almost as much as she adores vanquishing villains with the sharp blade concealed inside her cane. Despite others' opinions about her body and gender, nothing will stop her from seeing justice done. When her next mission drops her at the dastardly Earl of Densmore's castle, she is prepared to duel like gentlemen, only to be locked inside. Her trusty sword cannot defeat the castle's hidden traps or protect her heart from the devilishly handsome rogue guarding the keep. When reclusive inventor Stephen Lennox agreed to impersonate his cousin for a few days, he did not expect the Earl to vanish altogether. Nor could Stephen predict mounting death threats or the arrival of a beguiling, blade-wielding spinster who declares herself his new bodyguard. As the Earl's enemies lay siege to the castle, Stephen fights his way past Elizabeth's defenses. She will share his bed, but when the adventure concludes, she vows to sever their affair, unless he can somehow convince a swashbuckling siren to surrender her heart. I'm very excited for this, so I'll let you take it away, Erica.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun to write. Elizabeth is so swashbuckly, and Stephen is this hilarious tinker. So he makes these Rube Goldberg devices. So he has filled this castle with booby traps, essentially, like think Goonies. There's machines everywhere and leads to a lot of fun. So here is a scene where they lay eyes on each other for the first time. Another day, another batch of ominous correspondence. With a sigh, Stephen opened the newest missive from Richard Reddington. Did sons of viscounts truly have nothing else to do all day but scribble increasingly bloodthirsty threats to the Earl next door? Stephen skimmed the letter. Reddington was demanding immediate occupancy of Castle Harborough grounds. Consider this your official warning, Stephen read aloud. We're watching you. If you fail to hand over that deed, Mr. Reddington shall assume control by force, even if it means laying siege on his own castle. Oh, for the love of God. Stephen wouldn't fall for that. No spoiled lordling was choleric enough to storm his own castle. We're watching you, Stephen repeated in aristocratic accents. Of all the idle, idiotic threats. Reddington's country estate did adjoin the castle property, but a dense strip of woods stretched between them. Reddington could station a man at every window of his resplendent manor, and at best, all he would see were 3 acres of trees. Nonetheless, the sinister tone was unsettling enough that Stephen dropped to the stone floor for a round of press-up exercises. His anxious thoughts tended to ping and flail and spiral like the complex machines he put together. concentrating on the flexing of his muscles and the breaths in his lungs calmed the noise and helped Stephen to think. He was angry, was the problem. Angry with his flighty cousin for losing a castle he didn't own in a card game. He was also vexed with himself for being hoodwinked into this ruse to begin with. Nonetheless, Stephen was undeniably a better earl than the earl. In addition to settling accounts and making profitable investments and overseeing improvements on the various entailed properties, Stephen had also gone ahead and given every member of staff a rise in wages. After which, boredom had threatened, which was why Stephen had turned this castle into his laboratory away from home. He missed his books and his bed and his devices. Even though there were more staff in Castle Harbrook, the building somehow felt emptier and lonelier. A bold claim from a man so lonely, he spent every waking moment filling the emptiness in his life with machine after machine. Nonetheless, Stephen would defend this castle to the best of his considerable ability. Richard Reddington would not cross Castle Harbrook's threshold without Stephen's knowledge and authorization. No one would. Bells clanged overhead. Stephen jerked his head up to stare at them. Those bells were part of an early warning system he'd installed to ring when the property line had been crossed. Had the hidden archer been replaced with an even bolder attack? Stephen kept telescopes in all 4 of the castle's corner turrets, but those bells specifically signaled that a vehicle had arrived on the northern side, facing the street. It wasn't a delivery. The most recent shipment had come in yesterday, and the next wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. He hurried to the stone windows. A cross breeze flowed through the large rectangular openings on all 4 sides of the cylindrical turret. Ducking so that he could not be seen, Stephen pressed one eye to the telescope. A humble pony cart trudged into view. It was an ordinary country gig. Simple, mud-splattered. The pony lumbering up the private road was just as unassuming. Brown, short of stature, a general air of boredom with its task. Inside the gig was a long, thin crate and a woman whose visage was hidden beneath an enormous, wide-brimmed bonnet. He could not guess her age without a glimpse of her face, but one daintily gloved hand clutched the handle of a stout wooden cane. The beast drew to a stop. The woman climbed out of the gig with obvious gingerness, as though the ride up the hill had been exactly as arduous an experience as the pony cart's appearance implied. The wind whipped her dress against her body, revealing plump curves. Stephen changed his mind about being able to guess her age. The morning gown was of fine quality and tailored to flatter the woman's voluptuous shape. This was a young lady, walking like an old woman. Fashionable, but unchaperoned. Moneyed, but riding an absolute turnip of a pony cart. Stephen was certain of his conclusions, yet they did not sum up to anything he could compute. The more he watched the woman, the less he understood. Was she here to sell him something? She left her crate in the gig, and the gig untethered. The pony, for its part, seemed content to gnaw at the tall green grass, of which there was plenty. The grounds were covered in flowers and greenery for the pony's pleasure. Another gust of wind rose from the west, sending the brim of the woman's bonnet flying up away from her face. Just for a second. It was enough. Stephen swallowed hard. He had no idea who this woman was, but she was extraordinarily beautiful. A missionary, perhaps, here to chastise the Earl for failing to attend church on Sunday, again. Perhaps the crate was full of Bibles. He tilted his telescope to keep her in sight. The woman glanced around the door for the knocker. Stephen had removed it months ago to make the entrance less welcoming. She made a fist with her free-gloved hand and banged on the door with that. He would never have heard it, were it not for another system he'd installed to carry sound up through narrow tunnels he'd bored into reinforced stone walls. Surely Dunsmore wouldn't mind, in order to eavesdrop on any enemies who might approach. Stephen called it a whispering wall because it transmitted the slightest sound. The visitor banged again, louder. Stephen did not respond to her call. Neither did the servants. Before the Earl abandoned his castle and its occupants, he had instructed his staff just as firmly as he'd lectured Stephen. Let no one in. Undaunted, the woman lifted her cane and used that to rap against the castle's thick oak door. This could be heard with or without the aid of any listening contraptions. Its racket also went unanswered. "I know you're in there," she called up. "I can see smoke from your kitchen." Stephen fought the urge to yell back, "Your logic is unsound. Smoke from the kitchen means someone is at home, but it doesn't mean that I am." For one, this rejoinder would give away his position. For two, perhaps she was here to visit one of the scullery maids. He was certain this visitor wasn't here for the Earl of Densmore. No man with half a brain would leave a woman this beautiful behind. She rapped again with the heavy cane. "Please," she pleaded, "I've come from so far. Take pity on a weary traveler, I beg you." Stephen could not help but feel sorry for her predicament. She seemed harmless and nice enough, but rules were rules for a reason. If he let her in just because she was pretty and carried a cane, who knew what would be next? An army of missionaries with 5 carts worth of Bibles? She rapped one last time, then heaved a breath. Silence stretched around the castle. Even the wind stilled and the birds silenced, and the tree leaves ceased to rustle. No one was answering her plea. Not even nature itself stirred. "Have it your way," she muttered. Stephen heard the words as clearly as if the fetching visitor were whispering against the back of his neck. "Beth the Berserker it is." He blinked. Perhaps he had not heard her clearly. It had sounded as though she'd said. The woman marched toward the pony cart with her cane held high, like a field commander leading a platoon of marching soldiers into battle. She handed a bit of carrot to the pony, then tossed her cane inside the gig and ripped off her dainty gloves. With her bare hands, she wrenched open the wooden crate. From in its depths, she withdrew 2 enormous battle axes. Stephen stared in disbelief as the woman raised each into the air. Beneath the feminine poofs at her shoulders, muscles visibly flexed in what had previously seemed to be deceptively soft flesh. Axes held high, she marched back to the front door without slowing her pace or panting for breath. She looked like a Valkyrie descending upon a battlefield. Who was this woman? The latest intimidation tactic by Richard Reddington? Was the archer not enough? "Tell Reddington I'm not to be bothered," Stephen called out through the window. The woman jerked her gaze up to the turret, her previously pretty face a twisted mask of fury. "How dare you imply I hold any affiliation with that scoundrel?" Interesting. Before Stephen could apologize for his erroneous assumption, the woman let out a primal scream, ear-splitting enough to break glass, then began striking at the 10-inch thick oak door with enough force to rattle the iron hinges. There was no chance of anyone cutting through wood that impenetrable with an ordinary blade. Or, perhaps, Stephen amended, there was no chance of anyone ordinary doing so. Beth the Berserker was anything but ordinary. 5 minutes later, neither the screaming nor the thrashing showed any signs of slowing. As the woman struck at the door with her axes, shards of wood flew up at all angles, spraying the air around her as though she were caught inside a dust storm. He either had to get rid of her, which seemed unlikely, or allow her in, which was forbidden. Then again, at this rate, Stephen wouldn't need to allow anything. It might take Miss Berserker 3 days of frenzied chopping, but one way or another, this woman was slashing and hacking her way into the castle. "Very well," Stephen murmured. "Have it your way." He rose to his feet and pressed a lever.
How to Train Your Viscount by Courtney McCaskill. Today, you're reading from How to Train Your Viscount. I'm excited to have you read it. So for the listeners who don't know the book, the only one who can help her is the man who broke her heart. 4 years ago, Lady Caroline Astley took one look at Henry Greville, Viscount Thetford, and fell horribly in love in that particular way you can only fall in love at the age of 15. He didn't just reject her, he humiliated her. But now, in a stroke of rotten luck, he's the only one who can help her. It turns out that the paste pendant she borrowed from her sister Anne was no fake. It's actually an ancient Egyptian amulet, and now Anne wants to auction it off to save hundreds of widows and orphans. What Carol can't bear to tell her sister is that the necklace was stolen from right around her neck. Carol has a few clues, but she doesn't know an amulet from an obelisk, and the trail has gone cold. Guess who grew up in a house stuffed with Egyptian artifacts? Caro may despise Henry, but she needs him if she's going to track down the thieves. Which begs the question of which is worse, letting down the orphans or risking her heart all over again? Sounds fantastic. So, Courtney, do you want to set up this scene you're about to read?
Absolutely. So, as you heard in the blurb, Henry insulted Caro most terribly some years ago. Now she has come to London and made her debut, and he is desperate to apologize. He sent her a series of apology letters. She never responded. He's been trying to track her down. So, this scene takes place at the moment he finally corners her.
How exciting.
Mm. As soon as Mr. Parkinson was gone, Caro swept out the door, ignoring the Viscount. She scanned the street. "Do you see our hack, Fanny? I believe it is left. And to think I paid the driver a shilling to wait." "That usually works," a deep voice intoned. The bothersome man had followed her outside. "What a shame you happened upon an unscrupulous driver." "Well," Caro said, with a brightness she did not feel, "I'm sure another one will come along presently." "You will find that hacks are few and far between south of the river, but I would be delighted to escort you home." He gestured to a handsome high-flyer phaeton with a gold basket seat and midnight blue velvet cushions. It was drawn by a pair of gorgeous matched grays, which were being held by his tiger, a freckle-faced boy of perhaps 10 years of age. "How fortunate that we happened upon each other." Caro glared into his smug face. "Fortunate is not the word I would use, and I would rather go back inside and eat that mummified hand someone pulled out of an Irish bog than get in your phaeton." She gave him her profile. "Now, if you will excuse me." An hour later, Caro found herself seated in Lord Thetford's phaeton. It was rather remarkable, the series of calamities that had transpired to get her to this point. She could take a detached enough perspective to appreciate that. Things had actually gotten off to a promising start. Lord Thetford had attempted to speak with her, irritating man that he was. But Fanny, bless her, had declared that Caro shouldn't be standing full in the sun, and had opened her parasol directly into the Viscount's face. She had then proceeded to stand in front of her mistress like the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of hell. This had spared her from having to converse with him, but, as much as it pained her to admit that he was right, more than a half-hour passed without a single hackney carriage passing by. It had become clear that she needed a new plan. Her plan had not involved getting into Lord Thetford's phaeton, however. Lady Caroline Astley was not so easily defeated as that. She had informed Fanny that they would cross Blackfriars Bridge on foot and have better luck finding a hack on the other side. The walk had begun splendidly, if one's notion of splendidly involved hearing a string of obscenities that would have made even Harrington blush, when the drivers of two carts made for the same opening and almost collided. A fist fight ensued. Then a lecherous drunkard staggered over with arms outstretched toward Caro's bosom. She was once again saved by her indomitable maid, who stepped in front of her mistress wielding her parasol like a battle axe, shouting, "Don't even think about it, you buffle-headed Teetaw!" And to think that Caro had initially been disappointed not to have a fancy French maid. She made a note to take Fanny to Gunter's that afternoon. She loved the ices there. After the drunkard, it had simply been a matter of trying not to breathe in too deeply of the rancorous malodors of the Thames, and ignoring Lord Thetford's plaintive calls to give up this foolishness and get in his carriage, because of course the blasted man had followed her. But she had ignored him and carried on, and then the end of the bridge came into sight, and she had thought she was going to make it. She truly had. But then she had stepped in it. Literally. Lord Thetford grinned as he climbed up beside her. "I wonder what sort of manure that was." Caro did not deign to answer, but she was fairly certain the answer was pig. Her father was passionate about his herd of Gloucestershire old spots, so she had some degree of familiarity with the subject. "Whatever it was, it had a remarkable case of tapeworm," he mused. She glared silently over the waters of the Thames. "My favorite part," he continued, "was when it sucked the slipper right off your foot, and it immediately soaked through. I don't blame you for leaving it there. What a gorgeous team you have, my lord. Do you need me to drive them for you, or are you familiar with the process?" He glanced back to make sure Fanny and his tiger, Billy, had squeezed onto the tiny rumble seat behind them, then nudged the Greys forward. Caro shifted about, scooting as close to the door as she could manage. Since making her bow, 5 gentlemen had taken her for a drive in Hyde Park. She knew their phaetons had been every bit as narrow as this one, but for some reason their proximity had affected her not at all. Sitting next to Lord Thetford, on the other hand, she felt exquisitely self-conscious. The phaeton hit a bump, and his shoulder nudged hers. She all but jolted out of her skin. "Come, Lady Caroline," he said after a moment. "It is better this way." She maintained her stony silence, so he continued, "I know you wish to avoid me, but what you have failed to notice is that we are, how you say, doomed." "Doomed? How precisely you have captured my feelings." "First, we ran into each other over the mummified child in Thomas Hope's Egyptian room. Today it was the Laverian Museum, with its assorted bog parts and room full of monsters. It is reaching the point of absurdity. Where will we meet next? The Hunterian Museum? They have the skeleton of an Irish giant on display. And if you thought the monsters at the Laverian were grotesque, would you like to know what I found to be the most hideous sight at the Laverian Museum?" she asked sweetly. "I will give you a hint. It was in the same room as the remarkable horseshoes." He had the temerity to laugh. "My point is, it's far better for me to get my apology over with today, because apparently the fates have doomed us to run into each other at every crackpot's house and freak show in London until I've had my chance. And you would not believe how many freak shows there are in London." How annoying that he was right. She gave an aggrieved sigh. "Fine, you may proceed." She glared at him out of the corner of her eye. He looked nervous. As well he should. Excellent," he began awkwardly. "Well, 4 years ago I sent you a letter. I sent you 4 letters, actually. Did you, did I cast them into the fire without even bothering to open them? Why, yes, I did." Behind them, his tiger Billy gave a low whistle. "I see," Lord Thetford said. "Then you are unaware of the sentiments contained therein. What I wrote was—" "Allow me to guess," Caro said. "Seeing me standing on that balcony was one of the worst moments of your life. It was never your intention to insult me, nor to cause me any pain. You feel wretched, you are desperately sorry, and you beg my forgiveness, and so on and so forth. Do I have the gist of it?" "You understand me remarkably well. It's difficult for me to even find words to—" He gave her a tortured look. "Caro, I can't tell you how sorry I am. I was miserable for weeks afterwards. I still think about it every day, and I cringe, thinking how you said you didn't even want to dance with me, how you were dreading it." "Yes, I—" There was a loud thwacking sound as he grunted in pain. "Beg pardon, my lord," Fanny said loudly. "I was just opening me parasol." He rubbed the back of his head. "I don't know why you even need a parasol. We're fully in the shade." Fanny returned. "And what was it you said next?" Caro said. "Ah, yes, that you didn't want me following you around because I was a naive little child without any charms, that I was as flat as the Salisbury Plains." "Oh, that's very bad," Billy said, in what he doubtlessly thought was a whisper. "Very bad indeed," Fanny agreed. "I mean, look at her. Is he blind?" Billy asked. "'Tis either that or stupid," Fanny muttered. "The problem is that he don't have any sisters," Billy continued. 4 brothers, but no girls. Me, I've got 3 sisters, and I know full well—" "Billy!" Lord Thetford snapped. "Your commentary is neither required nor appreciated." "Yes, my lord. Beg pardon, my lord." "And my personal favorite," Caro said, "was when you said I was as dull as ditch water." Hearing a rustling behind her, she turned, raising a hand. "Thank you, Fanny, but there is no need to hit him again." Fanny already had her parasol aloft. "I didn't know he said all that." "I told you he insulted me most terribly to his friends on the balcony." "You left out a few pertinent details," Fanny grumbled. "Returning to the matter at hand," Lord Thetford said. "Yes, that is what I said. I cannot deny it. All I can do is tell you how deeply sorry I am." "Sorry to have been caught," Caro scoffed. "That's not it. That's not it at all. Next, you will explain how you had over-imbibed, how your friends were goading you, how—" "Both of which happen to be true, but those things are entirely irrelevant. I should have taken them to task. It is to my shame that I did not. No, I do not wish to make an excuse. I wish to make an apology. The only reason I said what I said is because I was a jackass." Based on our recent conversations, your use of the past tense seems a trifle optimistic. I do not blame you for being skeptical, nor do I blame you for hating me, but I have changed as a result of that day. I have, he insisted, seeing her dubious look. I never used to consider the feelings of anyone but myself. I am far from perfect today, but at least I'm trying. I cannot honestly say that I was before, and I'm no longer friends with Arthur Nichols and Jacob Cartwright. I began to notice a spiritedness to them, and I found that I did not much like the man I became in their company. He shook his head. One good thing came out of that horrible day because I made a brutal self-discovery. At least I'm no longer a complete cad as I was at the age of 21. Caro gazed at the passing scenery, absorbing his words. In truth, it was a better apology than she had thought he would make. She had expected a string of excuses. She was startled to realize that he was sincere. But there remained one problem. I believe you, she said. I believe that you regret having ever said it. I even believe you are sincerely sorry for having hurt me. But, she raised a hand as he started to interrupt, I also believe that you meant every word you said that day. I, his expression was plaintive, his brow furrowed in distress. Don't even bother to deny it, Caro said. The thing is, it had nothing to do with you specifically. At the age of 21, I wasn't interested in young ladies. Behind them, Fanny gave a great snort, which she then made a very half-hearted attempt to disguise as coughing. Lord Thetford sighed heavenward. Fine. That is to say, I was not interested in respectable young ladies. That's more like it, Fanny muttered. Billy concurred. The point is, Lord Thetford said, casting a glare over his shoulder, the fault was entirely mine. And Billy was right earlier. He gave her a rueful half-smile. Look at you now, the most beautiful girl in London. I'm not glad to have caused you pain, but I believe the end result will be better for you in every way. You would never be interested in the likes of me. His face fell as he returned his gaze to the horses. You'll probably be married to Lord Graverley before the month is out. Caro wasn't so sure. She hadn't even decided whether she wanted to set her cap for Lord Graverley, and in any case, there was no appropriate response to such a remark. She demurred. He drew in a breath. I've never dared to hope you might forgive me. I never felt I could possibly deserve it. But, she waved this off. Oh, I'm sure I will forgive you. He looked up, his face radiating shock and hope and something else. Caro found it difficult to maintain eye contact when he wore such an expression. It was a bit like staring directly into the sun. Your obvious sincerity makes it difficult to carry on hating you. Then, do you think, could we be friends, Caro? She closed her eyes for a beat. No, my lord, I honestly do not think we ever could. She raised a hand to silence his protest. We will see each other in the future. We run in the same circles that cannot be avoided. I will not cut you when we do. You need never worry about that. I will nod and I will smile. I will say good evening if the circumstances require it. But on those occasions when we meet, the kindest thing you could possibly do for me is to leave me alone. But, I will never treat you with such disrespect again. You have my word of honor upon that. And that isn't the problem. The problem is that you only wish to be my friend because you pity me. That is not true. Your first impression of me was that I was annoying and insipid, as dull as ditch water. And ever since I overheard you on the balcony, you have thought of me as poor, pathetic Caro. Yes, you have, she said when he made to protest. You never would have sought me out if I hadn't overheard what you said, if you had not felt sorry for me. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing I despise more than being pitied. I cannot abide it. I would much rather have the world's hatred than its condescension. It is why I have been avoiding this horrid conversation for all these years. But I like you, he protested. She arched a skeptical eyebrow at him. You didn't 4 years ago. No, he agreed, but yesterday. That was nice, wasn't it? It was not ladylike to roll one's eyes, but really, who could blame her? Allow me to clarify. Your notion of nice involves your likening me to a pig and a cow, my calling you asinine in return, your discussion of venereal disease followed by cannibalism, and my hissing at you to shut up before someone heard the ungodly things coming out of your mouth. Well, I enjoyed it, he muttered. I know you believe that, but the truth is the only reason you think you like me today is because you are determined to do so, because you feel guilty. Your true opinion of me is what you stated on the balcony 4 years ago. That is not true. I had the wrong impression of you entirely. I do not believe you. He gave her that look again, the same one he had been sporting for most of the conversation. It was beseeching, crestfallen, pitying. She could not stand it. Will you stop looking at me like that? How did we stumble into such a maudlin conversation? It is absolutely intolerable. I never imagined a context in which I might utter these words, but I preferred it when we were discussing venereal disease. He barked out a laugh. Truth be told, I did too. How shocking to find ourselves in agreement. Now, we're almost there. Do me a favor and say something completely obnoxious so I can go back to loathing you again. Just the first thing that springs into your mind. You have such a natural talent for it. He was grinning at her. Very well, I will do my best. May I speak frankly? Am I to understand that our conversations up until this point have been your most polite circumspection? How very alarming. You, Caroline Astley, are a sham. Do any of your suitors know what an acid tongue you really have? La, they do not, and I have no intention of letting them know the awful truth. At least not until I've caught one of them in the parson's mousetrap. He shook his head. Have you considered that you might be going about it all wrong? That you should look for a man who appreciates your wit? Such a man does not exist. I will sooner find a unicorn. He looked up at her when she said that for some reason. That's not true. Many a man would find your wit appealing. Spoken like a man. Trust me when I say that wit is not appreciated in a woman. Indeed, it is barely tolerated. No, it is something I must conceal at all costs. And yet you launched into me without hesitation. That's because I do not care the slightest bit what you think of me.
Portraits, Passions, and Other Pastimes by Charlie Lane.
So today you're reading us an excerpt from your novel, Portraits, Passions, and Other Pastimes, which is a fantastic title. I want to start things off with a little description of the book so readers know what to expect. So, a grumpy marquis with an inheritance problem. When his father dies, Rafe Bromley, new Marquis of Wayneborough, inherits a crumbling estate, an ocean of debt, a valuable art collection, and a most unusual stipulation in his father's will. No piece in the art collection can be sold unless Rafe creates a brilliant work of art. But he's all thumbs and no imagination, and that's never going to happen. Thank goodness for heiresses. Rafe will simply marry for money, except his mother's new companion, a clever but poor beauty, tests his resolve and makes him think maybe painting wouldn't be so hard. A clever companion with no home of her own. After 15 years of work, Matilda Bellevue has inherited a cottage of her very own. She'll make it her home after completing one final job, serving as companion to the Marquis of Wayneborough's mother. Her task is simple. Help the grieving Marchioness, and, above all else, do not fall in love with her employer, a man who makes her feel like she's finally found home. When Rafe asks Matilda to help him understand art and earn his inheritance, their attraction sizzles into something more. But she has no money, he must marry rich, and falling in love offers only heartache. So, Charlie, can you set up the scene you're about to read?
In the scene that I'm going to read, he is decided he needs a companion for his mother. His mother is just like over the top in all ways, including her grief. And despite her and her husband's flaws as parents, they were very much in love with one another. So she's really feeling the loss of her husband. And he, despite his anger at how his parents mistreated the fortune and everything that was entrusted to them to keep, he still, feels very protective of his mother and wants to take care of her. So he's going to go get her a companion. So this scene is from Matilda, the companion's point of view, and she is with the woman she's currently a companion for. And so Rafe is going to come in and basically be like, I need you, and we'll see what happens.
Nice. All right, take it away.
The Viscountess Pratsby started snoring, and Matilda peeked over the edge of her book. Lady Pratsby slumped in her large rose-pink chair, sleeping. Thank the heavens. The woman had been suffering a horrid bout of insomnia. Nothing seemed to work to help her sleep, and she despised being coddled, but she did not like Matilda to read to her, and it had been Matilda's turn to choose the book. Evelina, one of Matilda's least favorite books, had proved a blessing, and after a warm cup of tea and a chapter or two of Frances Burney's novel, Lady Pratsby snored contentedly, as Matilda had hoped she would. And Matilda could stop reading, thank the heavens. Her tongue had gone numb from reading aloud. She stretched her jaw up and down, side to side, and curled and uncurled her tongue. She stopped short of wagging it, and slowly, oh so slowly, as to avoid even the merest shush of skin against paper, she closed the book and stood. She'd been reading how long now? She looked to the tall clock ticking away across the room, its patterned rhythm adding an odd percussive to the soft patter of the light rain that had washed London all morning long, hitting the windows. She squinted, read the clock. She'd read for over an hour. No wonder her legs were stiff, her back ached, and her more unmentionable areas of the body had gone numb. She pressed her hands into her lower back and arched, stretching, praying no crack of bone and spine would echo across the room and wake the Viscountess. Ah, better. Now she just needed tea like a pup needed a scratch behind the ears. Imperative. She poured the now lukewarm beverage into her cup and swallowed it down in 4 large gulps, then retook her seat and opened the book once more. The die is thrown, she read in her most moderate, sleep-inducing tones, and I attend the event in trembling. What event? The events of Evelina always quite slipped from her mind as soon as she'd read them. She could never remember, from one chapter to the next, what had happened. Quite perfect book for inspiring slumber. In a fortnight, she'd never have to read Evelina again, if she did not want to. For the first time in, well, perhaps ever, her time would be her own, to do with as she pleased, in her own home. She grinned, and heard a happier tone in her usual monotonous recitation. Lady Pratsby shifted a bit, made a face, and snorted, more than snored. Just one. Perhaps it did not herald a waking. Lady Pratsby! Matilda stood, whirled around, and glared at the butler in the doorway, who'd called out. She held a finger to her lips. Shh! He shrank back, his eyes wide, flashing to the sleeping woman. Apologies, he mouthed. Matilda turned to the Viscountess, her breath held tight in her chest, hoping. The Viscountess's eyes shot open. He's mine, wench! Blast. Mr. Johns took a step farther into the room, collecting his dignity about him with a shove of his sharp nose into the air. Apologies for waking you, my lady, but our Marquess of Wayneborough is here to speak with Miss Bellevue. Are you at home? Lady Pratsby pulled herself more upright, patted her hair, and said, No, we're not. I'm tired. Mr. Johns turned to leave. Lady Pratsby, Matilda said, the Marquess has come to see me. You are still weary, and I would like you to retreat to your room and nap if possible. While you are resting, I'll visit with the Marquess. I wonder if others' companions order them about as you do me. If I order you about, it's because I care for you, Matilda said. Well, you can't visit with the man alone, and... Oh! She shook a finger at Mr. Johns. Isn't Lord Wayneborough the funny chap who has that outrageous house party every year, only for artists? Yes, that's him. Matilda folded her book and put it to the side, and I rather think I should speak to him. I worked for him for a year, a long time ago, as governess to his daughter. But why would he be here now, asking to speak to her? She could not say. Show him in, Johns. The Viscountess straightened her shoulders and smoothed her skirts. I've always been curious about that house party. Mr. Johns left, and Matilda rang for more tea. I think, she said, you should leave me to speak with him alone, my lady. Poppycock, you're an unmarried girl. I'm a companion, 34 years of age. He is a married man and father. He could be my father. I believe we can be allowed some privacy. She bustled to Lady Pratsby's side. Do you need help rising? I'm 5 and 6, my dear, not dead. But your knees, Lady Pratsby. Matilda held out a hand. Bah! But Lady Pratsby took the proffered help, and they stood together facing the door, smoothing their skirts. Lady Pratsby sliced her a sideways glance. What's a Marquess doing here to speak with you? As if Matilda hadn't been born a baron's daughter, hadn't taken her vows and had 2 seasons. After a certain amount of servitude, the life you were born into no longer mattered. Lady Pratsby's elbow dug into Matilda's ribs. He likely wishes to marry you. Matilda laughed and moved away from the bony assault. It is not that, I assure you. It must be 15 years since I've seen him. Randy men don't forget pretty faces. Or figures, Lady Pratsby said. He's horribly in love with his wife, Matilda assured her, who is, as far as I know, yet living. If you'd seen them together, you'd understand. He has no intentions of straying from his marriage bed. What then? Come now, don't hide anything from me. You're my companion, and it's your job to keep me informed and entertained, especially with gossip. I've no clue, my lady. The truth, that she barely said a word to him, even when she'd resided in his house. The day of the picnic had been her most interaction with the man and with his son. Footsteps down the hall, the heavy fall of thick-soled boots alongside Mr. John's softer patter. Mr. John swept into the room, the Marquess of Wayneborough. But the man, standing awkward by his side, turning the brim of his sodden hat round in thick, long, increasingly wet-gloved fingers, was not the Marquess of Wayneborough. The ends of his hair curled at his nape, stark and dark, damp and thick against the crisp white of his cravat. The rest of his hair, mahogany, a slight wave to it, was dry. The hat's doing likely. Mr. Johns must have taken his greatcoat, because the rest of him was dry as well, but for his boots, which boasted a layer of mud. His stubbled jaw and a straight, strong nose seemed carved from marble, in the nose, a little bump on it, up high, must have been broken once. His eyes were the pale blue of a hot summer sky, and he was not the Marquess she knew, but she did know him. The boy she'd known back then had been, it seemed, carved away entirely. Any soft points he'd had honed a rough hardness. She took several stumbling steps toward him. Viscount Stillman, I'd not expected, but Mr. John said, my father died. I'm the Marquess of Wayneborough now. She rocked back on her heels. Oh, I do apologize. I had no idea. My condolences, my lord. He scratched a hand through his hair, dividing it into dark sections. Blast. I should have broken the news in a less startling way. I did not think. Perhaps, but she did not remember him as a particularly eloquent or smooth sort of man. If a woman ever took it upon herself to polish him up, she'd fail miserably. But some men needed no polish. They were fine the way they were, rough-hewn and of the elements. My lord, Mr. John stepped forward. May I take your hat now? Pardon? Lord Wayneborough looked at the butler, startled. Oh, yes, of course. He jerked a wary glance toward Matilda and Lady Pratsby. Blast. Apologies. I remain in the country as much as possible, and I'm afraid there's not much need to hold my tongue there. Don't mind me, lad, Lady Pratsby said. I'm no stranger to an impolite word or two. I bet I could shock you. Lord Wayneborough looked to Matilda, mouth slightly open. Did he seek help? He'd find none from her. It suited Matilda most hours of the day to let her employer do and say as she pleased. It kept the woman happy, gave her pleasure, and Matilda would never deny that, especially not to the woman she'd met in the middle of her earth-swallowing grief. Lady Pratsby had healed quite nicely from losing her husband in the 3 years they'd been together. Oh, she would shock you, Matilda said, terribly. Yes, delightful. The Marquess scratched the back of his neck. Miss Bellevue, may I speak with you? To the point, then, yes, she remembered that about him, an admirable quality she'd long admired in him. Yes, of course, she said with a nod, just as Lady Pratsby said, no, of course not. Matilda turned stiff to her employer. My lady, you need not remain here. His lordship and I are old acquaintances. Lady Pratsby only narrowed her eyes at the Marquess. You can say what you have to say before me. Very well, then, he held his chin high. I'm in need of a companion for my mother. She has suffered much since the loss of my father, and she needs distraction, a friend. Lady Pratsby huffed. A paid friend? Is that not what you have, my lady? Lord Waynesborough tone could snap through wood. The Viscountess chuckled. But I won't for long if you have your way, isn't that right? You're trying to steal her from me. Matilda frowned. The two thought they could march right over her. Matilda preferred to do the marching herself. Once she understood the rhythm, she stepped between them. Do you intend to ask me to be a companion to your mother, my lord? I do, a stiff nod. His toe had started tapping on the floor. She pulled in a deep breath. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am honored you have thought of me, but Who else would I think of, Miss Bellevue? You were the only person who kept Maggie, that's his sister, from going feral all those years ago. You're the only reason she has a thimbleful of understanding of the social world she moves through, and you did it all without snuffing her out. He waved a hand toward Lady Pratsby. And look at the Viscountess. She clearly does not wish to lose you, and I have seen you through each and every new position you've taken, and each family, each house has looked on you with pride. I ask again, Miss Bellevue, who would I choose if not you? Huh? Lady Pratsby sank down into her pink chair to the creak of angry knees. Keep talking. I like it when a young man knows truth. Matilda gathered her skirts and swept toward the study door at the other end of the room. We will have that private audience now, my lord. Please follow me. She did not look to the Viscountess for confirmation. She was no green girl. Lady Pratsby wagged her finger at them. Don't take too long, or I'll come in after you. And Miss Bellevue? Matilda stopped at the door, Lord Wainbow almost bumping into her. Yes, my lady. Do let him down gently. I'm closing the door, Matilda said. Lady Pratsby waved a hand at them, and Matilda slipped into the small, dark study. She swept across the room and threw open the curtains, letting the gray light of the rainy day turn dark shadows into slightly brighter ones. When she turned to him, he stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, a lock of damp curling hair falling over one eye, a handsome man in an unrefined way. He should intimidate her, but she'd known him when he was still quite young, when he was seeing for the first time the breaks and fractures in the world, same as she was. They'd learned bitter truths side by side, and she saw in him not a gruff marquess demanding her help, but a man trying his best to keep his world afloat, same as she. My lord, she said, I'm so very sorry to hear of your loss. Is it recent? January. Thank you for your condolences, but what I truly need is your help. She nodded. That is what I understand, but I'm afraid I cannot help you. I cannot pay you well, which you know, of course. I assume that colors your refusal. Not at all, and I am valiantly succeeding in not being insulted by your implication. You have done much for me through the years, always a supporter from afar, and I do appreciate that. I'm quite grateful. Her breath hitched, and she spoke in lower tones. You've kept all your promises to me. What then puts a refusal on your tongue? He asked. I'm afraid, no, I'm pleased to tell you. I'm a free woman. In a fortnight, that is. Then you will be free of me, of the burden of promises made long ago. His brows lowered, drew together like two storm clouds about to strike lightning. The London rain had coalesced on his forehead. I've inherited a house, she explained. A home. In Cumbria, a small cottage, a small, very small annuity, from an aunt. When Lady Pratsby's daughter returns to London in a fortnight, I will leave her employ and head to Cumbria to live a life of solitude and ease. I see. You should have told me, he said. I had planned to write you once I settled, my lord. I have served others for 15 years, and now I shall serve myself. I hope you are pleased for me. Blast it, Matilda. Of course I am. You do not sound pleased. His palms found his face, scrubbed up and down. My mother, he heaved a sigh as his arms dropped heavy to his sides. It is not your worry. Please do give her my good wishes. She was always kind to me, and I hope she heals from her loss. Of course. And I do understand, he said, if I suddenly inherited, well, if 15 years of struggle came to an end. Another sigh, this one rough as a brick. I understand, Miss Bellevue, and I wish you well, even if selfishly I wish your aunt had left someone else her cottage in Cumbria. She laughed just enough to slide a bit of easiness between them. He bowed, a stiff board bent in two. Good day, Miss Bellevue. Good day, my lord. She pointed to a second door across the room. If you escape out that door, you will not have to face the Viscountess again. He grinned, the first one she'd seen from him since he'd arrived muddy-booted minutes before, and heavens, but her heart raced again. Not from fear this time, though she was startled by how handsome his chiseled, grinning face was, how tempting and soft his full lips looked curved round a moment of humor. Her heart skipped because in that grin was the young, unsure man who'd also pulled the air from her lungs with such ease. Thank you, he said, but at least you've saved me in this way, and Miss Bellevue, you were never a burden. She returned his smile and tried not to watch his legs and other lower anatomy move in his buckskins as he crossed the room and passed through the door. Tried and failed. No reason not to enjoy a peek, though, when she'd never see him again. He'd always had a lovely lower half. Now that man knows how to fill out a pair of pants. She'd been caught. She turned to find her employee leaning against the frame of the other door. Filling out breeches is not something someone can know how to do, Matilda said. It is just something they do. Precisely, girl, and that fellow does, Lady Pratsby said. If anything, we should be praising his tailor, Matilda insisted, and Oh, she closed her eyes and found the right path of conversation. Shall we finish another chapter of Evelina, my lady? Matilda joined her in the doorway. No, Lady Pratsby said, but we can talk about that man's offer. Matilda sailed into the other room. You told me to refuse him gently. I did. Ah, I see. Mrs. Hoskins has brought more tea. Lovely. I only have you, my dear companion, for another fortnight. I'll not send you away sooner than that. Just so, Matilda said. It had been interesting to see him again, to see the man he'd become. No more gangly youth, but something else was missing from him too, a vulnerability. He used to wear his smiles easily, and that no-nonsense way of speaking he'd had, that used to be his delivery of compliments and easy conversation. Now she feared he did not speak unless accomplishing something, did not move unless he had a purpose. A pity that. She'd lived the last 15 years of life with purpose and had thus learned the value of leisure. That life of labor would soon be done, the home she'd always longed for so very near. There were plenty of women in England in need of position as companion. Let the Marquess find someone else to work for him.